Welcome to UBC TV. It is Good Morning Uganda. Good Morning Uganda Extra. My name is Jagan Asemakola Ziksoka. On yet another very lovely day. Thank you for choosing to join us, and of course, welcoming you from the first segment of Good Morning Uganda through to our sports with Ruben Impima Chibirango. And of course, this is our last segment of the Good Morning Uganda show right here on UBC TV. It is another very lovely day, the 5th of July in this year, 2020. Thank you for choosing to be with us, and of course for joining us yet again. We're going to talk about human rights, and just days ago we had, of course, His Excellency the President of Uganda having an interaction and of course a chat with human rights persons, of course, with the Human Rights Commission just right here. And we'll talk to Ambassador Henry Maiga, our ambassador, our deputy head of missions in Abu Dhabi in UAE. Ambassador Maiga, let me see if you can actually see and hear me, and we start our conversation from here this morning from where you are. Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Jagenda. Yes, I'm seeing you and I'm also hearing you. You are very audible, and I want to greet Ugandans.
Yes.
And also wish them the very best today and, of course, the rest of the week. So I'm hearing you, I'm seeing you, Mr. Jagenda, so it is just as clear.
Well, thank you very much. And, of course, I'm happy to see you. You're also very audible and very clear. How is Abu Dhabi this morning, just before we get into our conversation?
Mr. Jagenda, of course, Abu Dhabi is okay. It is, we have a lot of sunshine here. The temperatures are in the region of 36, 38, and so on and so forth. So it's really a pleasure. It's really a pleasure that we have this fine weather here, and everything is going on well. Except that I want to make one correction, because my title is no longer Deputy Head of Mission of the Uganda's Embassy in Abu Dhabi. It's now Consul General Designate for Dubai Consulate, for Uganda Consulate in Dubai.
Thank you.
So I thought that I should make that little correction.
Thank you very much. You're my teacher for many years, so teachers don't have to let mistakes go uncorrected. But I thank you very much. Thank you. So that means I also need to change the contact in my phone book here. But just before we get into the conversation of human rights, as a teacher, of course, and as somebody who was at the University of Makerere for many years, close to 2.5 decades, just right there, and industrial actions were very synonymous with the Ivory Tower, or with Makerere University, and we just saw the teachers suspending the industrial action a few hours, having endured that for some time. Let me hear your thoughts first on the teacher strike or the teachers' industrial action in this country that has been going on before we get into our conversation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jagenda. But of course, it comes as some good news this morning that the teachers have actually suspended their strike, because that means that, of course, there's going to be a resumption of the teaching. And Ugandans should remember that the children, the school-going children in our country, had spent over 2 years without being taught as a result of the pandemic, which has been ravaging not only Uganda but the entire world. And that meant that we lost quite so much. And so the strike would definitely have added to that problem. And so I'm really very happy that teachers have dropped and they are resuming their work today, so that these children are not really a subject of the kinds of things that are going on between the teachers, and then the negotiations which are going on with the government and so on, and as far as pay is concerned. Because, like the Baganda say, once the teachers drop their tools and they don't work, and at the same time, of course, they are negotiating with the government, it's only the children who actually, as a result, suffer from that kind of industrial action. So it comes as very good news this morning that we are having the teachers resume their work, because the good thing is that the government has actually promised to look into their requests, which are basically about pay, and which is a concern to everybody who works. And I am happy that the president actually brought up that point very well. That look, there are so many other segments of government employees who should benefit from increases in terms of pay. But how do we do this, given the fact that there is a limit, that really problem of limitedness of the the monies that are available to government. So, and I think it pleaded to them that they should wait for another opportunity, probably next financial, something like that, when their issues are going to be looked into, so that the pay can be stepped up. So for me, this comes as really very welcome news that the teachers have agreed to resume teaching, so that our children can benefit from that very teaching as we move towards, especially examination time towards the end of this year. So it's extremely good that the teachers are resuming to work, and that the government has also promised to look into the requests that they've made.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, and I'm happy that I've heard your thoughts on the teachers' situation, of course, and the suspension of their industrial action. Let's get to the conversation of human rights this morning. You just know that the chief executive of the Human Rights Watch, Kenneth Roth, an American attorney, of course, was here a couple of days ago, met the president to share and, of course, to look into the Human Rights Watch report about Uganda, where lots of things were said, written that Uganda's human rights record is deteriorating. Looking at the events that we just had in the previous election of January 2021, and quite a number of things there. Talking about freedoms of expression, freedoms of speech, etc., etc. You read an article that you actually wrote responding to many of these things, and of course giving your own opinion of how our human rights record is and what you think. Roth, in one of his statements, said President Museveni told them not to lecture him or us on human rights, and I think this was understood differently by different persons or so. Let's talk about human rights from your perspective.
No, I think the president was very categorical to our friend from Human Rights Watch, because kind of Kenneth Roth was trying to say that, look, we really lecturing us as they always do. And the president was very categorical. He said, wait a minute, because you cannot lecture us about human rights, because Uganda has come from a very dire situation, especially, for instance, for when we look at the time of the 1970s and 1980s, when there were no rights to talk about. And I mean, every Ugandan remembers that what happened during, for instance, the 1970s, when a whole Archbishop of the Church of Uganda, General, was killed, and when the Chief Justice, Ben Chwanka, was also killed by the same regime of Idi Amin in the 1970s. So when we are talking about rights, somebody who sojourns in the country for just 1 or 2 days, and all of a sudden he becomes an expert about observation of human rights in Uganda, I think is totally unacceptable. I am happy that the president was very open about the issue, that Human Rights Watch doesn't have to actually lecture us about human rights, because we have come a long way, because this very government, President Yoweri Museveni, has established the Uganda Human Rights Commission, whose responsibility it is to really watch over, give a kind of an oversight in as far as observing human rights are concerned in Uganda. It gives periodic reports to which the government responds, and these things are even taken to the floor of parliament and discussed as much as possible. So the president, in my view, was very categorical. He was very right to have told Kenneth Roth, who was only in the country for 1 or 2 days, and he became all of a sudden an expert. Besides that, when you look at Human Rights Watch, has it has it had even the opportunity of sitting down, for instance, one of the leaders, for instance, in the Western Hemisphere, sit them down and ask them about human rights? Because I mean, we can talk about human rights, for instance, the US and so on and so forth. What is happening in that part of the world? What's happening in many of these other places like Ukraine and so on and so forth, where there is war? But right now, as we speak, there is no really institute as such in the country that would warrant somebody to talk about human rights being violated and so on and so forth. Of course, there are people who go across the board, and they, especially from the opposition extraction, who would want to make the government of President Yoweri Museveni look so bad in terms of observing human rights. And you remember the kinds of things that happened shortly before the elections, when, especially, let me be very, very specific, when the Noop goons burnt tires on the roads, when they were undressing women clad in yellow, when they were, petrol bombing buses that were plying the western route, and so on and so forth. So these kinds of things should not really be taken in their own right, but rather, does the Human Rights Watch expect the security forces to respond to these kinds of things? Because nobody is going to allow these kinds of things for as long as there are chief executive officers of the country to happen, and then people just fold their arms. These things have to be fought. These things have to be nipped in the bud by the security forces so that the country can remain as secure as possible.
Mr. Maiga, when I read your article, you actually talked about that same issue and said Roth has been to the country for just a couple of hours, 2 days, and he doesn't seem to be competent to actually talk about a country he's lived in for just 1 or 2 nights. But we're living in a global world. That I am in Uganda now, Maxwell speaking to you in Dubai, where you are. Somebody in the United States or Canada or China or everywhere can be part of the conversation that we're enduring here now. But looking at the things that were possibly cited or highlighted in here, when you look at the Human Rights Watch report or the Uganda Human Rights Commission report on human rights, they are not reports that are written like corruption reports or opinion polls, because opinion polls are opinion polls. Corruption reports, basically things that they do, their indexes are based on perception. What do you think about corruption in this country? What do you think about corruption in this country? But when you talk about human rights, normally they will have some tangible evidences of the people that have been tortured or done this to, or the other things. For example, one of the things they highlight in there was shutting down social media, especially during elections, Twitter, Facebook, etc., the movement of persons, freedom of speech, and quite a number of things. And when you look at all those, where does that put our country in as far as human rights is concerned? Are we trying to say that, well, I'm only thinking there's Human Rights Watch on the side of Kenneth Ross, but there's also the Uganda Human Rights Commission here of the lady here, my mother, Wangadia, Mariam Wangadia. What do we seem to say about these things? For example, when they highlight events like people being carried in numberless cars, the drone issues, of course, that we're talking about, etc. Are we saying, even when we do not demand any lecture for human rights or about human rights from anybody, are we saying it's all a bed of roses for us, or there are things that we think we need to fit and fix?
Of course, it can't be a bed of roses for us, because, I mean, improving and as far as observing human rights is a continuous process. But I just want to take you out of the country a little bit. Look at, for instance, the role played by the media in really inflaming up the situation in Rwanda shortly before the RPF took over power in Rwanda. What happened? What was the role of the media? The role of the media in that country was that they promoted the actions that actually led to the genocide in Rwanda. Yeah, I think let's be clear about this, because the media is not operating in a vacuum. The media is operating in countries, or in a country that has laws, a country that has security forces to enforce those laws, and so on, these kinds of things. And so the media, when we're moving towards, including, of course, the social media, when we're moving towards elections, what was their role? These are the questions that we need to be asking Kenneth Ross before he comes out with this really half-baked report, and as far as the observing of human rights in Uganda is concerned. Because what is the role of the media? If the role of the media is going to lead to a genocide, if the role of the media is going to lead to insecurity, if the role of the media is going to lead to insurrection, I can assure you there is no country in this world that can sit idly by and it watches the media destroying the country. Rwanda is a very good example, as I told you, because everybody knows what role the media played in as far as the starting of the genocide in that part of the world is concerned. So I am not aware of a country that simply watches or keeps itself out of this, really having no interest in what the media is doing. Right now, as we speak, you know about what's happening in Ukraine. And what's up, of course, how the West has responded. Many of these European countries, the EU to be specific, and of course the US, have actually been blocking Russian TV, which is called RT TV, and they don't allow them to broadcast on their, YouTube and all these kinds of things to the Western world. So they are blocking those very TV stations that are owned by the Russians from really putting across the ideas they have, to putting across the kinds of situations that they would aspire to have in Europe and all these kinds of things. So if you are going to be in charge of a country and you simply sit idly by as the media actually continues to put out things, and I'm not suggesting in any way that what RT that belongs to the Russians and the rest of the media houses in Russia are putting out negative things, but of course that biasness in the world, I mean in the West, against Russian television sets or television media houses and so on and so forth is really a very big problem. And I am not aware of a country that can watch, can just sit idly by as the media does these things. So it's extremely important for us to appreciate where are we coming from. For instance, in the 1970s and the early 1980s, what was the role of the media? Was it allowed? Because in any case, we had only one television set, one media house in terms of TV. But when this Yoweri Museveni administration took over power in 1986, everybody has been seeing the multiplication of these media houses all over the place, whether it is print media, whether it is electronic media. These things have been multiplying all over the place. And that, in my view, should be really looked at by people in this world, like Kenneth Ross, that look, where has this country come from? There has to be a scientific explanation. In other words, somebody must research about the human rights history of Uganda so that they come out with conclusions. Where are we coming from? In my view, the situation of human rights observation in Uganda has been gradually improving, and we are where we are at the moment as a country in terms of security, in terms of stability, in terms of peace, and so on and so forth, as a result of these improvements that have been actually put in place by the Yoweri Museveni administration. So it's extremely important for the Kenneth Rosts of this world, even before they begin to talk about their reports, which in my view are half-baked and based on no scientific research. And we are right when you said that there must be statistics showing these kinds of things like we do when it comes to corruption. What are the corruption indices and so on and so forth. So when Kenneth Ross just comes out blatantly and he puts things across, and I saw him, of course, giving a copy to the president and trying to explain things away and how he didn't accept the president's remarks. I was really irked, and I said that, look, this lecturing, definitely the president was right to reject the lectures from Kenneth Ross and rather listen to him. Of course, he gave him the audience, which was a plus in my view, because I've not, as I've said before at the beginning of this conversation, I've not seen any country in the Western world that has given that Human Rights Watch has actually, for instance, interviewed Biden or Boris Johnson or Angela Merkel or Emmanuel Macron and all these kinds of fellows when it comes to the operations, the Human Rights Watch. I am sure, of course, I'm aware that they, of course, gives situational reports as far as human rights is concerned about those countries in the West. But this kind of leverage, which is given by our country, and especially by President Yoweri Museveni, to Human Rights Watch, to even be listened to, and then when that opportunity is abused by a visitor like Kenneth Ross, who comes and then he begins to lecture the president, I think that is unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. The media must definitely be left to do their job, but they must really work within the confines of the law, just like the rest of the people in the country, including the opposition. They must, as a matter of fact, work within the confines of the law. But when they begin to touch roads, and when they begin to undress women who are dressed in yellow, and when they begin to petrol bomb buses that are plying the western route of Uganda, and all these kinds of things, I am told that they were even planning to ban petrol stations during the electoral season, that's our last electoral season. So these kinds of things are the very reason why our security forces rose to the occasion to stop them.
Ambassador Mayiga, thank you very much. President Museveni, in iteration to many of these issues or concerns or allegations, he actually said they will not be tolerated in Uganda. well, amidst of lots of things of disappearances, detentions without trial, etc., etc., where even before Kenneth Ross comes in, that the public here gets at times politically agitated to actually say this is a political witch hunt, etc., etc. President Museveni's iteration of this will not be tolerated in Uganda. How would we even decipher that?
Of course, the president has been very clear that he can't tolerate those kinds of things, especially where the security forces go overboard and they harass suspects and all these kinds of things. But at the same time, I want to give you an example. I want to give our listeners and those who are watching this program an example. During the last electoral season, when people became riotous in the city and they hammered a policeman almost to death, a policewoman. Somebody was using a hammer to kill her, and so on and so forth. So what did the public, those who think that the security forces were doing the wrong thing, what did they expect the security forces to do to such a person? I mean, to those people who were caught in the action or in the act of hammering that policewoman on the head, really ostensibly attempting to kill her, that kind of thing. So when those kinds of things happen, what do some expect the security forces to do? Is it to massage the suspects or what? In other words, what I'm trying to say is that there are many cases where the public, or specifically not even the public, I think let's be specific, members of the opposition have provoked security forces. You remember those kinds of things which happened in West Nile when there was that by-election, where even the president's convoy was actually pelted with stones and metallic objects and all these kinds of things. So when those things happen, you know, the people should not be surprised that the security forces actually take it upon themselves to make sure that the situation goes back to normalcy. And in the process, if they get you and you become provocative and you begin to pelt the security forces with stones and of course metallic objects, I mean, the consequence of that is absolutely clear. And as far as I'm concerned, the security forces, of course, are going to react. So I think the better position should be that even when we have our political differences, it is extremely important for us to still remain within the confines of the law as we confront those who we don't agree with politically, rather than becoming violent. The moment you become violent, yes, the security forces are also going to become violent. But of course, the president was very clear about this matter. He said, and his position has always been, that there should be no harassment of suspects for as long as, of course, they remain within the confines of the law. Because when you become violent, of course, the security forces are also going to become violent. I think we need to be very clear about this. Why do you think that many people, including you, Mr. Jagenda, are not confronted violently by the security forces? It is because you are a law-abiding citizen of the country. And therefore, the security forces can definitely not harass you, or they are not going to become violent against you, you know? And when that happens, it means that actually the security forces are also acting in accordance with the law. But when you become violent, when you are a member of the opposition and you think you can confront the security forces with the stones, with the metallic objects, with a hammer, like that policewoman was hammered on the head, definitely the security forces are going to come for you.
My rights are not alienable, just like your rights are, just like a police officer's rights are, etc. They are not alienable rights. You can't transfer them or give them away or so. Now, for the gentleman who tried to harm a police officer was actually violating her rights. And I think we need to condemn it the same way. Kenneth Roach and their team, of course, have to condemn that in the same manner. But the other question would be, how did we even get to where we are, Ndugu Ambassador Maiga, that we are discussing a situation that we think paints us in bad light. What is that thing? Yes, I was listening to President Museveni, and of course he said, we've gone through all the things through colonialism, we've gone through slave trade, we've endured wars, etc., etc. And of course, these things have just happened to us. They found us in a harmonious community, and of course we just got disjointed because of this or that. And some other persons benefit from this very crooked situation. But how did we get here, and what do we think needs to be done for us not to be looked at as that country or society that does not respect the rights of others? And I don't care, I really actually care to its done too. I wouldn't love an individual like myself to do the same to a police officer, just like I wouldn't want a police officer to also do it to an individual like me. So striking the balance, how did we get here, and what do we think needs to be done going forward?
Absolutely, because actually, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, respecting people's human rights, the human rights of citizens, is a continuous process, and therefore it has to be worked on. It has to be worked on continuously, and that's why, in the wisdom of the president and his administration, especially at the beginning of the NRM administration, when he had just taken power in Uganda, they created the Uganda Human Rights Commission, whose job it is to ensure that human rights of the citizens of Uganda are actually respected. So for me, it is already work in progress to make sure that people's human rights are actually respected. So because your question is very fundamental, what do? We're already doing those things. I'm not saying that we're already there or we're already in a heavenly place or something like that in terms of observing human rights in our country, but it is work in progress. But that work also places a responsibility on all of us, whether you are security forces, whether you are opposition, whether you are a supporter of NRM, there is a responsibility that you must have, that you must shoulder, especially when it comes to making sure that you respect those who are in charge of security in the country, so that also the security people can also respect you. Because this administration, I think, has been really very, very clear, and as far as the discipline of security forces is concerned. You remember that quite a number of people have been taken to the court-martial, quite a number of people who have who actually are in the security forces, as a result of them abusing the rights of people, have actually been taken to the court-martial, and the discipline has been handled that way. But I also don't expect that when the president gives the directives to the security forces to ensure that people's human rights are respected, he does not have to go to the state square to announce. I'm sure through radio calls and all these kinds of things, which are the avenues of communicating with the security forces by the head of state, the chief executive officer of the country. He does that job, and he will definitely not come to the state square to announce those kinds of things. But I'm sure directives have already been given, and I think it was in black and white, I think about 1.5 years ago, when the president actually, at one point in time, he put these things in writing, and they were actually publicized in the print media, the directives that he had given to the security forces to ensure that suspects are actually not violated in terms of their human rights. He has been very clear about that. But at the same time, recruiting these security forces from personnel, where do we get this personnel that we recruit into the security forces? They come from amongst us. And he gave an explanation that, look, because many of us still have the colonial mindset, that somebody, even if they are not violent, you have to beat them a little bit. That one, I think the president has also explained that. As a result, rising out of these discussions that we've been having about human rights. He has been very clear about that. Look, changing the mindset of somebody who is in security, that actually you have to respect the suspect, is also work in progress, because it takes time in order that these things are streamlined, the human rights of people are respected, and all these kinds of things. So it's extremely important for us to understand this, that look, this is work in progress. The security forces, of course, after, I don't know, I can't put a time limit, we will definitely stand up and do this job in a much better way. So it's work in progress in my view.
When we talk about human rights violations, we normally tend to look at violence as meted against somebody, torture in maybe detention cells or centers. Basically, that's where we get to look at. But you see, we talk about rights, and my rights are my rights. It's not only limited to movement or free speech or this or that. The other day, 1, 2, 3, 4 days ago, the Prime Minister of this country, Mama Robin Anabanja, visited the hospital, an impromptu visit, and just got there. The office of the superintendent was actually closed, and people in hospitals, they're struggling. Another hospital, I think in, I don't know whether it's Chaka or somewhere in Western Uganda, where a hospital is actually now looked at as a death center. You know, it's you take your patient to the hospital at your own it's at your own peril, that you have nothing to do, maybe just send them there and give them an easy way to actually die and do all the things. Looking at quite a number of things, we tend to limit human rights violations to maybe somebody was beaten when they were possibly found here, or done this to the disappearances, as we want to talk about them. But how about the other things? It's my right to go to a hospital to be treated, given medicine, looked after. I've done these things too. We don't see that happening. The judicial system, for example. There are people who are remanded forever. Somebody stays at the police station beyond the mandatory time that somebody is actually supposed to be there, and for very petty issues. And we're not looking at people who have actually done all the grievous things that you're talking about, but these are people with their simple, small, taught civil issues. And they're kept at the police station forever. Somebody tries to possibly find a secure bond for themselves, they can't get it. Somebody tries to maybe find a judgment through the judiciary, and they never find it. What we need to do with all these things, because yes, like you said, we have the human rights here. When you read President Museveni's 10-point program, you notice that I think point number 7 talks about elimination of corruption. And the government, the NRM government, has done its best in ensuring that they actually build institutions that are anti-corruption. There are quite a number of them. Everything that you want to look at is so many things that you want to look at to actually say all these things are put in place to see that we eliminate corruption. But we're still struggling with corruption with all the so many initiatives that the government has put into place. The policies, the projects, the programs, the departments of government, the agencies, etc., etc. All these are here. Similarly to human rights. Now, somebody wants to just go to Human Rights Commission to only say, I was beaten by the police, or I was assaulted by the army, but I went to hospital and didn't find medicine. I have a case with X, Y, or Z in the courts of laws. Nothing has happened to me. I have moved to all the courts. I have courts have never found a day for me to listen or to mention my case or do all the things to look at all those things. Aren't they part of the bigger human rights thing that we're talking about?
Absolutely, I would agree with you, because you see, and that is the mistake which Human Rights Watch does. Basically, to talk about political human rights, yeah? But the concept of human rights is much bigger than just political human rights, because you have economic human rights, you have social human rights, you have all sorts of rights. In other words, the concept is much bigger than what Human Rights Watch would want us to believe. You know, so I agree with you 100%, because for them they concentrate on political human rights. I don't know why, but maybe that gives them an entry into our gullible developing countries, because you're not going to see, of course, Human Rights Watch going into Europe or the US to begin to dictate to Biden about human rights in the US, why people are being shot on the streets and so on, so forth, including yesterday. You must have seen in Chicago, where I think quite a number of people were shot dead and others were wounded and all these kinds of things. Nobody's going to, you know. So this gives them an entry into our countries, which in their view, they consider to be gullible, to be soft spots, and as far as lecturing is concerned and all these kinds of things. And they concentrate only on the political rights. But the rights that we are talking about, or we should be talking about, and I agree with you, Babji, again, should be all-encompassing. We should include economic rights, we should include social rights, and so on and so forth. All these are equally important. And therefore, when Human Rights Watch comes here and they only begin to talk about political human rights, in my view, and of course, as I have seen in your view, I think they're making a mistake, because human rights are much bigger. It's a much bigger concept. It's a much bigger concept than what human rights would want us to believe. And that is extremely important for us to appreciate, so that we expand these arguments outside just politics. Because you see, the politics of a country depends on its history, a number of things, including its history. Where are we coming from as a country? I mean, we came from a colonial era where there were no rights to talk about, the political rights for that matter, no rights, even including economic rights, by the way. You remember that, for instance, the center of Kampala city was an exclusive place for only Asians and the white people from Europe and all this kind of, who are colonizing us. And the blacks were in Kisenya and so on. These stories are abound. Those Ugandans who are actually so interested, they can find these things, because black people, until Idi Amin came as a president, one of the good things that Idi Amin did in that country was actually to say, no, an African can also come to the center of the town. And those things are replicated throughout Africa, including in Kenya. I've been to Kenya, you have been to Kenya, I believe, Zimbabwe and all these kinds of places. It became extremely difficult for actually Africans to enjoy their economic rights, to enjoy their social rights and all these things. So, but of course, the impression these people would want us to give, and would want to give to us, is that we should only be talking about political rights, and I'm happy that you're expanding, Mr. Jagenda, the arguments about human rights to include things like economic rights, to include things like social rights, to include things like even the medical rights. You're talking about the Prime Minister going to Mpigi and she found the place empty, even if there were people who are employed by the government to ensure that people get the medical attention that they deserve. And so these human rights actually should be all-encompassing, and they should be as broad as possible. And Human Rights Watch, I wish that when they come next time to present the report, we should ask them to include the other rights, and not only in Uganda, but also in the rest of the world, where these things are not really doing very well. Thank you.
How are we performing in that regard now? Away from the traditional political human rights, but the other rights also, which we tend to tag to service delivery. How is our performance? How are we doing it? And what better thing can we actually do to ensure that we achieve those other human rights?
I can only say two things. One of them, again, is to say this is work in progress, because unless somebody does us a scientific research, when I still worked at Makerere University, and I'm happy that you noted that at the beginning of this conversation, Makerere Institute of Social Research, Social and Economic Research, used to carry out researches about these things. How are we doing in terms of social service delivery and all these kinds of things? I am not sure, I'm not aware, I'm not sure whether they still do those things. If they do, then we need to actually interface with these reports, or the reports that actually MISA or Makerere University Institute of Social and Economic Research does, so that we can see, do a situation analysis. But of course, that should be premised on where we are coming from, because you remember when the economy of Uganda went flat, especially in the 1970s, after the insecurities that we suffered, and also, of course, part of the 1980s. So economic rights in that way went down as a result. And so we need a research. And in my view, I think it's still work in progress to make sure that all these social services are provided to the citizens of Uganda. And I want to believe that actually the government of President Yoweri Museveni is doing a much better job than the rest of the governments that the country has had. Because you're aware, the statistics is abound in the Ministry, for instance, of Education, how many of these city schools have been constructed throughout the country. And the plan is to construct schools, secondary schools and primary schools, and replicate all these things in every sub-county of the country. So I don't have the numbers at the moment, unless we agree that in the subsequent discussion that we should have with these statistics. But the statistics is there, that actually the country is moving on well. Most of these, for instance, hospitals, regional hospitals, referral hospitals have actually been refurbished by the government of President Yoweri Museveni, including Mulago Hospital. It is a testimony. People who care can go there and see it. I remember one time I was with my friend at a talk show at NBS, Asmani Basari, and he was saying that this government has done nothing about the health sector. And I told him that you visit Mulago and see what's happening there, because the refurbishment was actually at that time going on and all these kinds of things. And these things have been replicated throughout the country, especially with the construction of health center 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then the refurbishment of the hospital. So in as far as really putting that infrastructure of schools, infrastructure of roads, infrastructure of, and these are economic benefits, infrastructure of hospitals, infrastructure of health centers, and so on and so forth. The government, in my view, is really focused on ensuring that the economic rights of Uganda are ensured. When we go to the social rights, the social human rights, I mean, that speaks volumes about what the Yoweri Museveni administration has actually done, because you know that the traditional rulers, or is it traditional leaders, were reinstated, and there was also restitution of some of the properties these traditional institutions have, like the return of some of the properties they have. And so Buganda has its Kabaka, Bunyoro has, Toro has, even the Bateso have, Busoga has. So social rights, economic rights are being respected. Even if actually political rights are being respected, but we should be sure. I mean, people should make sure that they actually perform their responsibilities very well. If you're a civilian and a citizen of the country and a law-abiding person, even if you don't support the government, the current government, doesn't mean that you should pelt the security forces who are actually employees of that very administration with stones and metallic objects. You definitely, in that way, be ensuring that your responsibility as a citizen is being carried out properly. The security forces, the president has been very clear. to make sure, and he has said it many times, that they should be really good at their jobs of ensuring that the human rights of people or citizens of the country are not violated.
Very finally, Ambassador Maiga, just before I let you go and before I close this down, do we have any take home from Kenneth Roth's report, or there is no take home for us that we just need to get it straight away and forget about it?
No, we can't throw it away. Even if actually, in terms of content, it might be talking about things which are wayward, but I think it's a reminder that we have a responsibility as Ugandans to ensure that human rights of everyone, whether it is security forces, whether it is us, civilians and citizens of the country, whether you are an NRM supporter, whether you are a supporter of the opposition, we have a responsibility. And therefore, when we are reminded that, yes, human rights of everyone have to be respected, yes, that's good. And it reminds us of our obligations. And so there is a take home in as far as the content I may have to contest. I'm contesting the content of the report from Kenneth Roth. Definitely that one I'm contesting. But the reminder that human rights are as important as any other thing in terms of taking our country forward, that one I recognize as something, as a take home, definitely. But the content, I am definitely not very, very amused by what they were saying.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Maiga. Finally from you in 30 seconds.
Oh, I just want to greet my people, Uganda, that let's keep the human rights of everyone, whether it is security, us as civilians, we must respect each other's human rights. It's extremely important. Whether those rights are economic, political, or social, we must ensure that those human rights are respected.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank you so much again, Ambassador Henry Maiga, the Consulate General Designate, Uganda Consulate in Dubai. Thank you very much for the conversation and the engagement today. Just wishing you all the best in UAE.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jagan.
Thank you very much, and we'll just stop our conversation here for today. And of course, thanking Ambassador Henry Maiga, our Consul General Designate at the Consulate in Dubai, for joining us this morning, and of course talking about human rights. Just right there, we'll stop it here for today, and of course to promise you that we will continue and get engaged in more conversations on Good Morning Uganda, etc. Tomorrow, for God and my country, stay blessed, and wishing you all the best for today. For God and my country, shalom.
Live from UB.